The interest rates and inflation now have separated so far that the cost of farming has become almost unbearable.
After years on the farm, Lawrence and Mary Lou Gray are calling it quits. It's just become too expensive and too risky. We'll see what their story says about the American farmer tonight.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
Maybe 2 years from now things will get better, or next year, as agriculture has always done, next year is going to be a better year. I'm tired of that, I guess, and I'm not going to project that, and so I'm going to get out of the operation of it.
A growing number of American farmers are joining Lawrence Gray in getting out of the farming business. Tonight, we'll look at the future of the American farmer and the shape of the 1985 Farm Bill.
Good evening. Ronald Reagan will accept his party's nomination for president later tonight, no doubt repeating his claim that he has restored economic vitality, lowered inflation, and placed the country on a prosperous economic course. But if pressed, even Mr. Reagan would have to concede that a lot of that economic improvement so far has missed the American farmer. The Republican Party platform, in a way, concedes as much, saying that the Reagan administration has, quote, set the stage for rural America to be prosperous again. But if the stage is set for prosperity, a lot of American farmers still find themselves waiting in the wings. Democratic presidential candidate Walter Mondale has been hitting hard on the issue, claiming that 1,000 farmers and ranchers have gone out of business every week since Ronald Reagan has been in office. Tonight, we look at the problems confronting the American farmer and focus on the broad debate that is shaping up over two solutions advanced to straighten out the problems on the farm. Here's producer Bruce Reichert.
There was a time when almost everybody lived on a farm or knew someone who did. But last year, the number of American farms declined by 2%, and some experts are predicting that another 4% will fold by the end of this year. Call it hyperbole if you will, but some observers are saying that this is the worst crisis in farming since the Great Depression.
The interest rates and inflation now have separated so far that the cost of farming has become almost unbearable.
Lawrence and Mary Lou Gray have farmed all their lives. They're no stranger to hard work, and they know the bad times associated with farming. But according to the Grays, excessive government regulations, low inflation, and a strong U.S. dollar overseas have suddenly combined to make the bad times a whole lot worse.
And so I think when I coupled all these together, looked at our ground and looked at the poor prospects of my boys that are farming with me, the kind of life that was ahead of them right now, operating expenses greater than I could service, I'm refusing to put my property in debt.
We've all heard how difficult it is to be a farmer. Among farmers' complaints, a bungled federal farm policy, soaring interest rates, and a weak international market for their produce, coupled this year with hordes of federal and state grasshoppers. But perhaps the only thing more difficult than being a farmer is having to decide not to be a farmer. And that's the decision that Lawrence and Mary Lou Gray have had to make.
For, I'd say, 2 years, why we've talked about it a lot, wondering just what we should do. And I told him one day I thought we were a little bit like the old story they used to tell about the fellow who won $1 million, and they asked him what he was going to do with it, and he said he was going to farm till it was all gone. And that's really the point that we got to. Pretty soon we were going to have borrowed on our farm until we wouldn't even have our home anymore. And that was a dream 19 years coming for us, and I just think we just decided that before we lost everything, maybe we ought to look at something else.
It's been a very tough decision. When you have people that have worked for me as many years as some of my people have, and even my two boys, you know, we're all going to be on the job market. And but I think from an economic standpoint, I'm not willing to go in debt further. I want to liquidate the debt. I'm sorry to say that I don't think our policies, and I'm not saying the Republican or Democrat administrations, I'm not referring to that. Our food policies of this nation have always been a cheap food policy, but now we've destroyed our foreign markets. we've got some real problems ahead of us in agriculture.
The Gray's decision was based on the economics of farming, but it's a decision that won't be easy for other members of the family.
I think that it's going to be really hard. I think it's going to be hard during the harvest and seeing other people harvest and not being in it and not being a part of it. Like during beet harvest, we would always take stuff out to the guys in the field, and I don't know, I think it's going to be hard. I think it'll be harder on Glenn than it will on me. It's just a way of life.
But just how many will leave this way of life? According to the state supervisor for the Farmers Home Administration, not that many.
I think Lawrence Gray's situation is probably peculiar to Lawrence Gray. Lawrence has been a fair-sized farmer in the state of Idaho for a number of years, and his decision to get out does surprise me, but I would say it is not typical. In fact, I would suspect that 90% or 95% of the farmers in the state of Idaho will be here next year.
But for that to happen, Gray believes certain policies must change.
My advice would be two ways. Number one is farm programs have never solved any of agriculture's dilemmas. They've only been a band-aid to a wound and have only postponed the inevitable. I think it's my personal opinion, it's time that we destroy perhaps all farm programs, including FHA and federal crop insurance, and I will really be taken to task for that statement. But they have created part of our problem. But as long as we have nations that are subsidizing their agriculture to a much greater extent than America does the American farmer, and yet dumping it on the world market to feed whatever market might be able to buy it, and yet we talk about the hungry people of the world, but see, the hungry people still haven't got any money to buy that food regardless of where it comes from.
So is that a catch-22 situation?
I really think it is. And then when we look at our monetary policies that we have now developed, I think we've got some real problems to iron out.
Hardly anyone would disagree with Lawrence Gray that we do have some problems to iron out. Hardly anyone thinks the present system is working very well. Some examples. Ronald Reagan says the farmers are still suffering the consequences of Jimmy Carter's 4 years in office. Walter Mondale charges that Reagan policies have, quote, driven a dagger into the heart of every farmer. And conservative Iowa Republican Senator Roger Jepsen says simply, the non-working farm policy of this country is an embarrassment. So what do we do about it? We have two views tonight. Ross Corvus is a research economist with the American Farm Bureau. He has one of our views tonight, the other from Tom Stroshine, an Aberdeen, Idaho farmer, a director of the Utah-Idaho Farmers Union, and a member of the Idaho Sheep Commission. Let me ask both of you, gentlemen, Mr. Corvus, you first. How many farmers, in your opinion, are in the situation that Lawrence Gray is in?
I'd say that probably Mr. Gray is in a rather unique position in that he has looked at his situation and decided that as he sees the future, he has better opportunity someplace else. And when we look at in terms of people going out of business, what we're seeing is, number one, people who are about the retirement age and would probably be going out of business regardless of the situation, or we have people who are basically being forced out. Their debt load situation, their cash flow is such that they're forced out. So I think Mr. Gray is in a very unique position in that he is voluntarily exiting and looking elsewhere based on, from what we've seen at least, a very clear set of ideas as to how he sees the future going.
But most farmers who are leaving the business are not doing it so voluntarily.
Well, I'd say you have the one group that is being either voluntarily or being forced to leave, and then you have another group that is retiring because of age factors.
Mr. Stroshine, what's your view of that? How many farmers are in the same situation or a similar situation?
Well, I guess I'm living proof of what Lawrence Gray is doing. I had the same experience last fall. Southern Idaho possibly is unique in Idaho that we have Southern Idaho agriculture and Western Idaho. We aren't as diversified as I see it over on the western side here in Boise. The livestock industry in Southern Idaho is in real serious problems. I was in the sheep business. We had 3 years of real tough times. Ironically, I had the opportunity to make my own decision to either get out or hang on. I did very similar to what Mr. Gray's doing. I sold my sheep operation last year, and hopefully I can make it now on the farm. I see in the livestock business especially a lot of people. We lost 3 large sheep operations in southern Idaho last fall. Idaho, I believe Idaho has some serious problems if you're not diversified.
Let me ask both of you gentlemen for, I mentioned these assessments, these political assessments of the situation. First, the president saying that basically farmers, he said it last week when he was in Missouri, I think, that farmers are suffering because of the residual effects of Jimmy Carter's policies. Is that fair?
Well, let me first say that it's awfully hard to have a policy debate based on what politicians say out on the stump. So the 3 quotes that you had there, I probably say, well, maybe it makes something nice for the evening news, but I don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. But down to the specific comment that the president made, he is partially right. The high interest rates of the 1980s are a direct result of the inflation of the 1970s. But I think it's very important to keep in mind that that is just not former President Carter's inflation. That was also Richard Nixon's inflation, and if you go back into the 1960s where it really started with Lyndon Johnson. So without a doubt, we're suffering now because of some policy decisions, not only just from 1977 through 1980, but from some policy decisions in terms of monetary policy and economic policy that really started in the mid-1960s.
So, Mr. Strohschein, is it sort of a worthless exercise to try to apportion blame here for the situation that farmers find themselves in?
Well, I think Lawrence hit on it. I think basically the problem is we've been too long involved in the political arena with the farm situation. As I see it, this farm crisis, and I'm going to label it a crisis, we better get out of the political arena. We've got some major problems ahead, and we better start working at getting some of the answers to all these questions that are coming up. Like I said, Lawrence flat said it, no political party has come up with any solution to the farm situation because of modern technology and the value of the dollar overseas. Our markets aren't there anymore. We geared up to high production in this country. We have no markets. High interest rates are affecting our cost of production. Very few farmers are operating on their own money now. I'm at 14.5% interest. I'm not even making 2% on my investment. Now, there's something wrong with that type of economic
Well, one of those quotes I mentioned came from a partisan, certainly, Senator Jepsen from a farm state, Iowa, but he said basically everybody's to fault. We cannot, it's an embarrassment that we can't design a policy that can benefit farmers. Why can't we? Mr. Corbett?
Well, first, farm programs, like any government program, are basically designed to protect the status quo. And be it Mr. Jepsen or any other politician, they will look no farther than, say, the next year or year and a half. You can't fault them completely because that's the environment that they live in. Many of our problems, we can go back to 1982, where we had some policies that resulted in a lot of grain being stored in the Farmer Held Reserve. That then precipitated the PIC program in 1983. Then the PIC program precipitates something else in 1984. So we have
short-term policies that don't contribute to any long-term solution.
Yes, I think if you look at the history of farm programs since 1933, as we calculated, we've had about 18 what we would call major pieces of farm program legislation and about 60 minor pieces. So we have Congress legislating about once every 9 months, and then wondering why it doesn't make a whole lot of sense after 50 years.
Well, you've set the stage then for where I want to take this discussion. In next year, in 1985, the Congress will write another farm bill, supposedly a long-term farm bill. There are basically 2 specific approaches being suggested. In broadest possible terms, they are that there should be more free market in the agriculture area. The other, what Lawrence Gray was saying about doing away with the FHA, doing away with crop insurance, those sorts of things. The other side of that equation would be strict controls on production. In other words, the existing programs need to be adjusted to make them work. Mr. Strohschein, which way should we go?
Well, I think for the present, we've got to really look at the situation, and I see no other alternative right now as unless we can create some rapid markets, we are going to have to go to some type of supply management program. I agree. This Band-Aid type farm policy that we've had, it seems like every administration comes up with their own program and none of them have worked. I think that's one thing by experience we've learned, that over the years very few farm programs have worked because they've been short-term, poorly thought out. Geographically, I think the Idaho farmer is in a problem that we kind of are on the western side of the Washington, D.C. area, and they design grain programs for the Midwest. They're not designed for our row crop type agriculture here in Idaho. So, but I see no other alternative right now except that we have to have some cash flow into the Idaho agricultural situation right now, whether it's some money that we can live with on the interest rates to get our cash flow going, because net worth to a farmer anymore, net worth means nothing. The banker, he hardly looks at your net worth statement. He's got us geared to a cash flow type operation. And at $3 wheat, and thank goodness we've got 58, 60-cent lambs this year. I had 45-cent lambs last year. You can't cash flow an operation with the present commodity prices. We're very fortunate in Idaho with the Idaho potato. We've had a couple of good years there. But
in general, you're saying we need some way to control the supply in some way.
I see no other alternative right now but to control supply or create some rapid markets somewhere, and I just don't see it with the value of the dollar so high in our foreign countries and our deficit. I think that is one of the biggest problems is this federal deficit the farmer's living with. We just cannot maintain a status quo with that kind of thing hanging over our heads in this country.
Corvus, the Farm Bureau views it differently, doesn't it?
Yes, I think one point is that the issue is not between a totally free market and a totally government-managed agriculture. The real issue is which way are we going to be shifting? Are we going to be shifting more market-oriented or less market-oriented? Now, one problem I have with some of Tom's comments is we talk about 50 years of farm program failure and then come back and say, but the solution is more farm program. And what we would then be implying is that somehow we're so much more brighter than everybody else who has come before us from the supply management side. So I have some real problem of first saying that our problem has been government involvement and our solution is more government involvement. Now, looking a little bit more specifically...
Well, let me just interrupt you for a second and let Mr. Stroschein comment on that.
Well, I would like to clarify my stand on that. I'm not so sure we need government involvement with supply management. I think we've got to be looking... Hey, we're in the 1980s, heading for 2000. We're in the computer age. Surely there is some plan that can be enacted to basically get government out of agriculture, but have an impartial board that possibly appointed, similar to our Federal Reserve, that manages food policy in this country. I'm not happy with government in agriculture, no one is. But I think the legislature is charged to set the laws of this country. Then we need some impartial board to handle the management and the plan so it doesn't change every time the political arena changes. It's proven it doesn't work. So when I'm talking of supply management, I'm talking about a program that surely can be farmer managed. I think we're coming a lot closer. The fact that Ross and I are here today on this panel shows that the farm people are starting to talk to each other. Hey, we've been in our own corner for too long. And I would hope that the meeting we're having today here in Boise is going to mend some of these problems we've had on philosophies and that, and we get down to the crux of the problem and start working towards solutions.
Mr. Corvus?
Well, I think you still come back to government is going to decide that there should be a board, and then government is going to have to fund that. And anytime you have government involved, you're going to have politics involved. I think it's very nice to say, let's remove this from politics. But a government policy, is by its very nature a political issue. And so I don't see us setting up a Federal Reserve type thing or anything else that's going to, quote, insulate us from politics. And I would see it in a farmer's worst advantage to have his operating decisions taken away from him and given to some board where you have some business people, some labor unions, some farmers, maybe some, quote, public members. I don't see that in the best interest of agriculture. That is what we would call a corporate statist approach, where you say that there's some people out there who are far brighter than the people actually involved in the production and selling of agricultural products, and they should set the course. I think, that is picking up on probably some of Gary Hart's discussion about an industrial policy where somehow government and other private individuals are wiser than the market as a whole. So I guess I have some real problem with that. But coming back to
let me let Mr. Corvus go on and give me some specifics, if you can, one or two, about how the Farm Bureau would have us move to a more market-oriented agriculture.
I think before we do that, I have to cover one other point that Tom brought up. When we talk about cutting back production, we need supply management, we have to quit producing. That automatically assumes that you can somehow create wealth without production. And I think that is where we get into a great amount of difficulty. We think somehow that our problem is that we're too productive, so if we become less productive, we would be better off. But that flies totally in all the history of economics from day one, where you don't end up in better shape by not producing, because wealth is created through production. And if you look at over the last 50 years, our basic approach in agricultural policy has been that we're too productive, so let's figure out some way to kill off some of that output. And I think we have to change that thinking. We have to have what I would call a pro-economic growth policy for agriculture. The idea that farmers are in the business of producing and selling.
What about changing that idea that we have to control production because, well, you heard him say it, Mr. Stroheim?
Well, I think the problem is we sit here and everything we do is affected by the federal government in agriculture anymore. Our foreign policy is set up by the State Department. The Office of Management and the Budget sets how much they're going to spend in farm programs or whatnot. I see the problem. If we're going to get government out of agriculture, then let's get it totally out and let the marketplace or supply set the tone then. But we sit here and we look at every other major industry in this country, and somewhere along the line they've been bailed out by the federal government. It's a fact of life, I guess, today that we cannot survive if we're the only segment of the economy that sits here and thinks we can do our own thing. When we don't even have anyone in Idaho. Sure, we've gone on trade missions and this type of thing, but right now I know of no real effort to even work on foreign markets seriously. We hope that down the road there's going to be some hope there, but we don't have that time mark right here today. I think we've got a couple more years and we're going to lose our livestock industry in southern Idaho. New Zealand is importing lamb in here. It's no big factor, but it's enough to affect our markets. I think these foreign countries are managing their farm production, and they've got a plan that they would very much like to have our agricultural market.
Isn't that true, Mr. Corvus, that other countries are managing, subsidizing, if you will, farm production in a way that we don't even do it in this country? And how could we expect farmers really to compete in that sort of an international marketplace?
Well, keep in mind first that this fiscal year we're spending about $6 or $7 billion on price and income support programs for agriculture. Last year we spent somewhere over $18 billion. The year before we spent $11 billion. So I don't think we can say that in this country we're doing nothing. Without a doubt, you have other people in the world that are giving their agriculture various forms of help. You also have some countries that are giving very little help. That is something we have to live with.
But you're saying we should be doing less of that sort of thing.
No, my point is that we should start out with policy that has some very clear goals, and that goal has to be pro-economic growth. And then whatever we do in agriculture, if in fact the Office of Management and Budget is going to say, or Congress is going to say that in the '85 Farm Bill you can only spend $7 billion per year, then it becomes a question of how are you going to spend that $7 billion. If in fact we have some constraints that we're going to operate in, then you start with a program that is pro-economic growth, and then you try to do the best you can managing that $7 billion that you're going to get.
But see, Mark, that, as I see, part of the problem. We sit here and we have X amount of dollars to solve a farm problem. to balance a budget. We're missing the whole point of the thing. We need to get our priorities in order and work to make agriculture stronger and more healthy. But we sit here, and like Ross said, and that's just what's happening, where we can spend so much for every program in this country to try to get this budget balanced. And hey, that is got to be one of our first priorities, to get that federal deficit down. But I think we're going in the back door of trying to solve the farm problem when we don't talk about the basic problem that's going on in the farm. Mark, this thing is serious enough that I had the opportunity to go back to Springfield, Illinois and testify at a hearing that the National Democratic Policy Drafting Committee set up for agriculture. And the testimony of the people in the Midwest, I came back to Idaho feeling pretty good about my own situation. They're a one or two commodity area through the Midwest, and I don't think it's just a poor farmer. But I heard one lady testify about a suicide in her family. You know, I think it's that serious. The Lutheran Church in this country has actually got ministers going out in the field in farm areas for counseling. It's that serious about the human aspect of this thing. That's what I'm concerned. Economically, I think we'll bite the bullet and hopefully we'll get the thing in order. But the human aspect of it has really got me concerned of what Lawrence talked about in my own situation. I've got an 11-year-old son. This is the first time in his life he hasn't had the opportunity to go to the summer range to see the sheep. I think you have to experience that to know what it's doing to the human being.
I hear what you're saying. Unfortunately, I only have 2 minutes left, and I want to go back to Mr. Corvus's point about, give me a specific about how the Farm Bureau would have us move in a more market-oriented way.
Okay, I think you have to start with the fact that we have to produce and sell. That's what farmers are in the business of doing. Our domestic market is growing very slowly, if at all. We're a relatively well-fed population. That's not to say we don't have some problems, but in general, we're not going to increase consumption at home very much.
So we got to sell it internationally.
So we have to look outside our own borders. And we then have to concentrate on those countries where we have the best opportunities. We have to be price competitive, or otherwise, you're absolutely right, the New Zealanders and everyone else are going to take those markets away from us. So we have to recognize we have to produce and sell. We have to meet the prices that other people are willing to sell at. We're going to have to deal with the strong dollar and all those types of things. The most important thing we have to do is promote economic growth in the world.
All that sounds great, but how do we do it practically?
You get out there and you work at it through PL 480 programs, expanded credit programs. There's all kinds of things, but the important thing is you start with the idea, realizing that you have to do that. And it's not a question of being able to say we have problems in agriculture, so let's go look and see if we're going to get some more money out of the Treasury to solve those problems.
And the bottom line is you're not going to do what you suggest if we control the production of commodities.
Because the only thing we're going to do is give markets to other countries of the world.
30 seconds. You've got the last word, Mr. Strohschein.
Thank you. Well, I don't completely disagree with Ross. I think anything we do to get agriculture back on the vital course that it originally was is a necessity. But we need something fast. You know, I see my neighbors.
So we don't have time to wait for these international markets.
We've got to have a crash program to get us back in the situation that we deserve as the producer of America's food.
We got to go, gentlemen. Mr. Strohschein and Mr. Corvus, we thank you, gentlemen, for being with us tonight. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mark.
That's our time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.